last year. But today we have John Shedd. You probably all know John Shedd, Vice President of Operations.
Vice President of Campus Planning and Operations.
Yep. And John's going to speak to the Architectural Review Board regulations. And I won't acknowledge anybody else in the moment.
Does anyone else need this?
Okay. And we'll just pass it around. With that, John, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So thank you for coming, and I just want to clarify something that was in the newspaper. It said that we're talking about the new architectural and land use regulations. Those, we have not created any new ones yet. These are from 2013. That's the newest version that we have. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear and that no one was expecting something else. But we are actually in the process of taking all of the comments and question marks that we've had over the last several years from since we issued out the 2013 document, and we're trying to see how to incorporate it into a new document. So our Architectural Review Board and staff right now are in the process of making edits to this existing document and making some amendments potentially, but we're in the very beginning stages of that and trying to see where it goes from there. And I won't make any statement on when that's coming out because, again, we're not sure when the board is going to have the moment to put it on their agenda and to approve it or not. So it'll be coming out within the next year or year and a half, I believe. So you have anything to add to that, Bob? That's good. Okay.
Will you have a preliminary document available for comments?
That's probably, we're still talking about how to do the public, sessions, assuming we would. Similar to the last time when we did it, we had public comments that added to what we did here, and I'm pretty sure that'll be something that is involved. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. So just to clarify one other thing, so this is the architectural and land use regulations. We also have rules and regulations of Chautauqua Institution, and those are a separate document. Those include things like vehicle traffic, what you can do around the grounds. That's enforced by our police department. This architectural and land use regulations is enforced by our architectural and land use administrator. Currently, that's me. I'll be finding someone soon to come on board and work with us and take that role, but so for the next year or so, I'm still going to be dealing with this sort of thing like I did previously. I've been involved in a lot of it since then anyway. But we'll be moving on to a new person, hopefully, that's going to have the requirements to know how to handle this kind of work. So we'll get started on what we're going to present, and then we'll have questions at the end. So this is Architectural and Land Use Regulations is about trying to protect your property value and the community, as well as protecting the National Historic Landmark, because this entire campus is a National Historic Landmark designation. And so with that comes responsibility on the part of the property owners and on the part of the institution. You as property owners are stewards of your property. So the National Trust and the Department of Interior from our government, so it's part of the National Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation Department. They have guidelines on how to preserve properties in historic districts. We've taken the approach that you are the steward of your property. You have use requirements, summer use, sometimes some people are all year use, but we want to give you control to an extent over what you do with your property because it is your property. We're not coming down on people as historic preservation police unless you're outside of the regulations and guidelines here. And so we understand the need for modern convenience. We understand the need for low maintenance projects at your house where if you want to put up a product that's longer lasting than wood, We have alternative products that are in the regulations that are allowed. There are some that are not allowed. So just be aware that we understand and are balancing. The Architectural Review Board and the Board of Trustees understands that, and they want to help people to be able to live here for a long time and enjoy their properties for a long time. So we're not just coming down strictly the same way that the Department of Interior does for historic landmarks, But we encourage you as the property owner to do as much as you can to maintain your historic property. If your property is considered a historic treasure, for example, although every house that's on this campus is considered part of that district. It may not be, an old house, but it is in this district, so you do have a responsibility. That also improves your property value. So if you are maintaining it in within the guidelines of historic preservation, that is probably to your advantage as well if you do it in the right ways. It makes your property much more valuable, but it also provides an enhancement for the community, so the overall community property value goes up. So, with that being said, these regulations are the second round of regulations. There was an older version that actually looks like this. This is the old version, and this came out, this particular revision was August of 2010. So this one was taken and totally revamped, and we currently have this document. So this is the 2013 version. And as we said before, there's been a lot of public input that went into this document, and we also did several sessions with the community on how to use the document, as well as contractors who are going to be bound by these rules that you guys rely on a lot. And so even though some of the regulations had been doctored over or changed over time, edited, this last 2013 was a big overhaul. And as I said before, this next version, when we get that wrapped up, is really going to be edits. It's not going to be a wholesale renovation of that document. So the newest regulations in the red book here, these are categorized really nicely. They're more organized, so you can have tables and charts that you can identify. Like the one you're looking at right now is talking about maximum building heights, for example. So each district of this community has a somewhat different requirement for building heights or for setbacks, depending on the type of district. And for example, and I'll show you a map in a minute, the central core, which is the oldest part of the community, all those houses are very close together. They're right on top of each other. So to maintain the character of that community area, we're trying to be strict with those, but we're also trying to understand safety, because when you're that close together, for example, if you want to build something that's going to be within 10 feet of a neighboring property, you have to get a variance from the Architecture Review Board. And that's going to happen a lot in that district. But this, for example, is just the heights. It tells you that you have maximum building heights. And there's a chart just like this for each district in that book. So it's helping identify the buildable area that you can be within. And there's also a section that talks about the types of use for a particular neighborhood. And some of the areas that you're going to be in, for example, if you want to have an apartment building in certain districts, all the districts are shown in columns like this, and you'll look for multifamily dwellings, and in the mixed-use core, it's permitted. But in the neighborhood district, there's a special exception required for that type of building in that zone. The Miller Park lakefront area has a grandfather clause in it, so you're allowed to do those things if it's already there. And again, it's permitted in the multifamily suburban district. And again, I'll show you that map in a second here. But this is the kind of charts that you'll run into in that book. If you wanted to change a use, you just look at this chart and you see if you have to go to the ARB for a special exception or anything like that. This is another chart. This talks about the ISR, which is impervious surface ratio. As many of you have heard over the years here, we're trying to be very responsible with stormwater management because our lake is impaired. In fact, today I had to close all of our beaches except one, and that particular beach wasn't open anyway because we didn't have a lifeguard. And it's because of the potential for harmful algal blooms. And those harmful algal blooms are primarily a result of stormwater runoff that goes into the lake and causes these problems. So we're trying to prevent stormwater from just rushing into the lake with all of those nutrients in it, like the phosphorus and nitrogen that are natural in the soils around here, as well as the agricultural runoff that you'll get. So to do that, we are trying to get the water that's coming from all of the watershed here at Chautauqua, the entire Chautauqua property, all the way up into the golf course down to the lake, is the watershed here. That's the extent of the watershed. So anything that happens on institution property is going to go into the lake, and if we can manage that water better, it might help make the lake better. We're pretty sure it's already had some improvements. So we include in this regulations for property owners to have maximum impervious surface ratios. So there's a calculation that tells you how much hard surfacing that doesn't allow water to go through can be on your property. And that includes walkways, that includes your house. Just the footprint of your house is considered impervious. Some materials, like you can put stone or pavers, the pavers on your driveway or on a walkway, some of those systems are considered semi-pervious. So they do allow some water to go through them. And so in the regulations, there's an allowance that tells you what percent calculation you can use if you are using a system that detains water and keeps it from going into the lake fast. And so when you apply that, say it's 85% for flagstone, for example, that's considered 85% impervious. So that means 15% of that lets water go through if the system is built correctly. So you calculate all of the areas, or your contractor or your architect, they calculate all of the areas on your property, and there's a maximum allowable on this requirement here. So here the maximum ISR for this particular area is 1.37. I'm sorry, that's FAR. Here's the ISR. So it's hard to read. Let me back up a minute and look at my, I think it says 80. Yeah, 80% is 80% of the total site area, including all surfaces of driveways, walkways, window wells, patios, etc. And 20% of the site must remain green and pervious. So those are the maximums for this particular location. There's a chart like this for each section of the districts. So that's important to know. And we do not allow concrete or asphalt driveways anymore. Those have to be semi-pervious systems. We encourage you as well for walkways, but again, it has to fall under this ISR maximum. And that's pretty important, especially because of what's going on with the lake. I wanted to make sure to point that out. And we'll help you through the calculations if there's a problem. Most of the contractors and architects and engineers know how to do that. And there are systems that have different types of details that'll help to show you that sort of thing. And
Is the entire document available online?
yes, it is, and I have at the very end, I have the link to the document, and it's also available in hard copy. He said, is there a link to this anywhere online? And there is, and we also have a hard copy. So it basically defines all aspects of the work that goes on here at Chautauqua. If you are going to do pretty much anything that involves construction, you should come to our office and get an application, or at least call and check into it to see if you have a question, if you've looked into the book. Because there's a matrix that tells you when you need a compliance certificate and when you need an architectural review board review. And some cases, like if it's just maintenance, you don't need that. Some painting, you don't need a certificate. And so there are some little things that don't require it, but they're outlined in the book. They have a chart that shows you what you need to come to the Architecture Review Board for, or what you can come to the administrator for a review. If you come to our office and it only requires an administrative review, depending on the complexity of the project, it should only take about a week at the most to review your project, unless we have a huge backlog. Like at the very beginning of the off season, like in late August, early September, we get a pretty big backlog of everybody sending in their applications at the same time. That might take about 2 weeks to clear those out. But usually I've issued documents right on the spot. When somebody comes in and it's something simple, I'll issue a compliance certificate. And that just tells us that it's compliant with the architectural land use regulations. And then I issue a certificate like this. This was the 2018-19 certificate. And so this gets posted on your window in a visible location. Because if I don't see these somewhere and somebody's doing construction, I'm already angry that they haven't posted it. Because I have to stop and say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing a project here? I may have reviewed the project, but I also probably have reviewed 50 more projects and can't remember that I reviewed that project. So if this is not in the window, the contractor actually gets a penalty. We send them a penalty fee. And then, so we want this posted in the window, and it gives you the dates that you can work on the project and any other particular requirements that are needed for that particular project. And that tells you that, yeah, you're in compliance with the institution's documents, at least the drawings and the application work. And then we're checking to make sure as you go along with your project, we're going to do walkthroughs occasionally to make sure that it's going the way it's supposed to go based on what you submitted in the documents. Now, a lot of times we don't get involved in the interior. We're primarily focused on the way the exterior looks, unless it's structural and demolition, which in any case you're going to have the local code enforcement officer involved also. So the town of Chautauqua, they are responsible for looking at code, building code. We're looking at what is similar to zoning. So we're looking at how the building looks, what it's going to, what lines it's crossing, and that sort of thing. If we see something, we'll notify you. If we see a code issue, but it's not our responsibility to do that. We're here primarily to review the architectural land use regulations and tee you off to whether or not something's going on that you're not aware of. So there's, again, two levels. There's architectural and land use regulations, which is my department, the Administrator of Architectural and Land Use Regulations, and then the town of Chautauqua, the code enforcement officer. The code enforcement office gets involved if you're doing a roof project or anything structural or any price tag above, I think it's $20,000 of work at your property. That's when you need a New York State building permit. This whole idea for the regulations is to define the aspects of the work, and then again look at preservation, construction type, how it's going to affect the neighborhood. Demolition is a big deal. Partial demolition is also a big deal. So if you're going to tear off a dormer, or if you're going to tear off a part of your house that you don't think is significant, that in current regulations, a lot of that has to go to the Architectural Review Board. That's one of those things we're looking at on how could we potentially give some relief if it's just a little shed on the side of a building, or something that is obviously, if you're going to tear down a porch, for example, and rebuild it in the same place, that's considered partial demolition, and it technically has to go to the Architectural Review Board. We're in the process of working through that to find out if you're going back in a very similar format, if it's going to look just like it, if the footprint's going to be the same, maybe you won't have to go to the Architectural Review Board. But those are the kind of things we're looking at right now. But demolition is a red flag, so if you're going to do any kind of demolition, you need to really talk to us. So we also help walk you as the property owner, the architects and the contractors through this whole process. We'll review the drawings. If there are drawings, there need to be drawings. A lot of times people come in with a small sketch on a pad of paper, and if it's something really minor, I can sometimes work that out with you, but we have a list of documents that are required to be submitted with your application. They don't have to be by an architect or an engineer unless it's a project that's going to require that level, and that's determined by the town of Chautauqua. And you really should consider it. If it's any type of semi-substantial renovation, you should consider an architect or an engineer to be involved. And the documents need to represent what you're going to do. You can't give us a set of documents and then come back a month later and have built it and say, oh, we changed this and that and this, because we've actually had to have people tear things down if it's not built the right way. And it's to protect the community from that type of infringement or encroachment. It also gives you, the regulations, the way they're written, incentivize preservation. And again, it's really in your best interest, if you are a property owner, to have historic preservation guidelines as one of your priorities. Because if you look, again, right outside the fence line here at Chautauqua, the property values are half of what they are in here. If you're lucky, they're half. And a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it has to do with that preservation designation, that we're a historic district. So if you keep that up, if you all keep your property values up that way, it's going to enhance the property values throughout the community. And it'll raise the value of the community around it too. So the regulations, the way they're written, they do have that in mind. But again, like I said, we're also trying to give people an opportunity to have a property that's low maintenance and usable. So we understand those things. And as I said, we do stop by and check out projects as they're going along, and we try to bring the contractor into the loop and say, hey, you're not doing that the way it was drawn. You have a set of drawings that we have and that doesn't match the set of drawings you have. I've done that so many times. I've walked in with a set of drawings, and I show them the drawings, and this contractor's never seen the set of drawings that I had in the application, and they've got something completely different. That's the owner's responsibility. That's your responsibility because it's your property. So if they've already started building something, if it's not going to make a big difference, I can approve it, and I'll do that. I'll try to work with you as much as I can. But if it's something like even a window location on the exterior, if it's off, a 1.5 feet, 2 feet, it might make a big difference on the balance of that exterior appearance. And so we need to be really cautious to make sure that we're checking on these things and helping you to understand that it needs to be the way it was when it was submitted. And then we're trying to make sure that property owners around the project are notified. That's very difficult because we're using the files from the clerk's office, the county clerk's office, who has the tax rolls. And if you have a name on your property and an address that's different than where you're located, the notification is going to the property that's listed, the address that's listed on the clerk's office documents. We try our best to know where everybody is, but sometimes you don't get your notification. We're supposed to notify people within 150 feet of the property that's having work done on it when there's an architectural review board review, for example. And we also are trying to post on the site when a project has been approved for even a non-ARB review project. So the process is slowly getting better. It hasn't been perfect, but a lot of it is due to the mailing address issue with who owns the property and who should be getting notification. We'll come back, at the end of the construction period, right at the beginning of our season in June, and a homeowner will come up and say, I knew nothing about that project. And we'll pull out a letter that went to an address that was listed for their project, and they had no idea that was what was happening, that they didn't know where the mail was going, apparently. But again, we've missed a few as well, definitely. That happens occasionally. We try our best. Here's that map I was talking to you about. This is how you reference each section of the architectural and land use regulations to know which part of the book you're looking at. And that purple section there is the central core, for example. And it says right there, it says mixed use core. So you'll look in the architecture, and I'll show you the booklet too. I'm going to get to that toward the end. But each section will say mixed use core or neighborhood traditional or Miller Park. I've taken my manual and tabbed them all. That's the only way I know where everything is in there. So, but they are very well organized by section. And it's pretty obvious where they are. It gives you the street names. Sometimes hard to read, obviously, so if you have a question, check in our office if you're going to fill out an application. And then each application has a line item that asks for you to identify which district you're in when you fill it out, because that'll help guide us toward what document you're looking at, and we look at it and say, no, that's not that part of the book that you should be in, or yes, that is the right part of the book. And again, It gives you an identification in the book. Each section that's broken out by those districts talks about the character of that neighborhood. It's a really interesting read if you've ever had a chance to look at the thought process of when our group of people who developed these regulations, when they walked around and decided what the character of the neighborhood was, they wrote it and made an interesting commentary about what that district looks like and why certain things are important in that district. So you'll see at the very beginning of each section that description. And then it talks again about the building envelope, the massing and the character of the building, the way it should look, and design standards that help with the execution of the projects, telling you, everything from setbacks to heights, as I said, and impervious surface ratios. There's also a set of supplemental regulations in there, and again, I'm going to flip through the booklet so you can see what it is on the screen. But there's supplements that give you some graphic details, so it helps you better understand what's going on. And there's other little things like ancillary buildings, if you want to build a little building on your property, what the requirements are to do that. The equipment requirements, like where can you put an air conditioning unit, where can you, if you can, put solar on your building, and little antennas, that sort of thing. So it's all outlined in there. We hope it's all outlined in there. And again, we're trying to find the things that haven't applied in there. So then the application process, we have you can either fill it out electronically or you can come and pick one up. We have hard copies. Most people have been using the hard copies still. And it's about a 5 or 6 page document that has a lot of, it tries to cover everything that you could possibly be doing. But if you're just painting, you don't have to fill everything out. You can just say painting and district and that sort of thing. So it's pretty simple. And again, once I get that in my office, it might take about a week to review it, depending again on how difficult things are here. And usually it's about a $25 fee. I think it's still 20, maybe it's 35. Yeah, it's 35 now. See, I just took over again. So I gotta make sure I know. Yeah, it's 35 for all exterior and interior remodeling applications. And that's to help pay for the administrative fee of reviewing these things and all of the things that we have to do. Additions to existing buildings is $60. New construction and substantial rehab is $100. And anything that goes to the ARB is $300. And those fees, again, we review those annually with the board to make sure that they're okay for the upcoming year. And we make some adjustments. I think that one was recently adjusted up because there is a lot of time that goes into this review process in a lot of cases, especially when we're checking, on your project over and over during the year. There's a timeline that it's very important to know that if you're going to the Architectural Review Board for a review process, that is a legal process. And we've tried to make sure that the window of time is adequate for us to review the first application and then to ask you for additional documentation that may be missing from that initial application to get it ready and all set for review. And then we have to notify, again, people around your property within 150 feet. You actually have to notify the people around you within 150 feet about the project. And that has to happen within 30 or before 30 days before the meeting. And so what we do is we prepare the letter that describes what variances you're requesting and anything about the project that we think is important to put into that notification. And then we give you the letter along with a list of the people that we believe are within 150 feet of your property with stickers that you can put on the envelopes. We try to make it as easy as possible, but it's on you as the property owner to make sure that that happens in a timely manner. And you have to have a certificate of mailing prepared once you go to the post office. And it's very simple. It sounds like a lot, but it's pretty simple. They give us a little certificate that says you mailed all of these little documents out. And that goes with the Architectural Review Board packet. And so everything that you're going to submit for that ARB meeting is supposed to be in our office and ready for someone to come and look at as soon as that notification goes out. So for example, if you submit something 30 days before, and they've been notified, the neighbors have all been notified, and you come into my office after everybody's been notified with a change to your drawings or with some new drawing, we're not supposed to review that because the neighbors are supposed to be able to come in at any time 30 days prior to that meeting and review your drawings to see how it's going to affect them. So if you submit something late, you might have to go to the different ARB meeting later on. And we're trying to be very strict with that because that is a legal process. I'm going to have questions later.
I just wanted to pursue that same, and you talked about the fact that the person who receives the letter is responsible for reviewing it. Could you address the fact, how do they then say we don't want this variance that the property owners?
Oh, good question. So once the letter goes out, and if you've come and reviewed it or looked at it online, we have PDFs of them, which we have available. And so if you have a comment prior to the meeting, we request comments from the community. It's in that notification letter, and those comments have to come to our office. It's arb@chq.org. Those have to come to that office by 5 o'clock the day before the meeting, the Architecture Review Board meeting. So then at the meeting, those are either read aloud or entered into the record if the ARB members have already read it. And that lets the ARB members know what issues that you have with that set of drawings. And they do consider those. I've seen that changes happen. Okay, 10 minutes, almost done. And let's see, I think we've already gone through that. Again, if you stay within the regulations, if you're within your buildable area and you don't require a variance, you don't have to go to the ARB. So that's your best bet. And in a lot of cases, we can allow some minor encroachments, like if you're crossing a line within 6 inches or so, and it's always been that way. There's minor little encroachments that we can allow if it's something that's similar to what was existing. Let's see. Again, building envelope. This is one of those graphic, next page is the graph. This is one of those graphics that are in there that helps show you what the ARB was talking about in the regulations and what the ideas are. This one talks about the peak of the roof is the tallest point of the roof crest, because there are questions like that. What is the peak? And then where the eave line is, that sort of thing. And talks about dormers, what a dormer may exceed the roof slope, and it gives you the criteria when you can do that. It's all kinds of really interesting graphics that are very helpful. Some photographs that show you specifically what you're looking for. So this just gives you the idea. Floor area ratio, that's another part of what you're doing. So if you're going to do an addition to your house, the idea is to keep the houses the right size in the community. So we don't want you doubling the size of your house if most of the sizes of the houses are small in your neighborhood, because it just kind of throws off the neighborhood. So there's a maximum floor area ratio that you're allowed. And the calculations are right there, and they're in the book. And any architect or at that point, you're probably going to need an architect if you're doing additions, and they'll help you through that process. And this shows you a little bit more graphically about it. And there are bonuses. So I won't get into the bonuses, but like basement and attic, if you're going to do work in an attic or a basement space, there are ways of not including that in your floor area ratio to benefit you. Let's see. That's the ISR that we were talking about. That's helping with the stormwater runoff. Architectural guidelines, again, we're trying to keep the design of the houses here consistent with the character and architecture of the neighborhood and the community. A lot of the houses here are vernacular, which they were designed as a local flair, but you can get into the Victorian styles or stick built or just any kind of type. You want to try to maintain an academically recognized type of architecture in your description of what you're doing, because that helps guide on why you're doing it that way. But if it's a new building in like say for example on the north end, there's not a lot of specific architectural character up there. And that's more the playground for architects, So you can have a vernacular style up there. Again, we got into demolition a little bit, and substantial rehabilitation. If it's substantial, it's probably going to go to the Architecture Review Board depending on what you're doing. And again, you should have an architect work with you on that. Parking, this is really the only thing that we talk about for parking in the architectural and land use regulations is the design of the parking space and what qualifies as a parking space. We don't get into telling you how many parking spaces you get at that house or where that's located specifically. But if you do have a parking space identified at your house in a new design, we want to see what makes you think you can get a parking space in there. Typically, it's 8'6" by 20 and has to be behind the plane of the house. So the very front of your porch or the farthest front part of your house, the car needs to be beyond that so that people can't see it coming down the street. That's the idea there. Tree protection. So if you're going to do any kind of a project that requires excavation around your site, or if you're going to have a lot of trucks driving across the roots of trees, you have to provide protection for your trees and for any trees around you, even potentially your neighbor's trees, because sometimes your contractor is going to be on the neighboring property, and it's just because they're going to be maneuvering, and that's only with your permission, obviously. But occasionally it does happen, and you damage tree roots, and you can kill a tree. And there are some substantial penalties if you take a tree down as part of a project without notifying us and requesting that permission to do so, even on your property. And if you take one down on institution property, it's really serious financial damage to the institution, and so you will be receiving penalties for that. And here's the online resources that we have. So it's hard to read the purple down at the bottom there. So if you go to chq.org and you look over, there's a tab called About Us, and then below that tab, it's construction resources. All of these documents are under that tab, and it's at that link. I just went straight to the architectural and land use regulations and clicked that link. So that gets you the free version of this book. This is also, like I said, it's available for $10 in our office just for the printing fee, and we're having more made right now. So those are all available, and I think that's all I wanted to talk about. Bob, did you have anything you want to mention? Or Bob Jeffrey, he's the chairman of the Architecture Review Board and a board member for the trustees. And just so you know, all of the Architecture Review Board members are trustees, and it's a law. It's a New York State law that requires that. And we have a mix right now, a really good mix. We have architects, a couple of architects, developer, and then property owners who have an interest in this type of thing, that have some knowledge. And that's what we try to do, is to get a good mix. The board assigns them that position, or that forces them into that position, I should say, to be on the Architecture Review Board. And they look for a good mix of knowledge from that member who they're going to put onto the Architecture Review Board. And then my position as the administrator of architectural and land use regulations, I attend the board meetings and I prepare all these documents. I'm not a voting member. I'm there for technical assistance primarily. They'll ask me a question once in a while. I'll give them my input. Or if I hear something that I know that they need to hear, I'll bring it up at the meeting. And there's also legal counsel at that meeting from the institution side. So that's all I had to present.
You can open up to questions.
You want to monitor this? Or you want
Sure. First hand up.
How extensive are the regulations regarding landscaping?
As far as landscaping goes, the biggest concern we have with landscaping are grade changes, major grade changes that will affect drainage to neighboring properties, any effects on trees that you're going to have, existing trees, the type of plantings to make sure that they're not invasive species as considered invasive in this region. So if you're going to do that type of thing, a landscape architect's very helpful, but you can also refer to us and we'll review it with our master gardener and see if there's any issues that she has.
Aesthetic considerations, or primarily the three you just
Primarily what we said, yeah. It's your garden. I'm going to bring up those regulations that I talked about earlier. So this is what, let me page up. this is what the book looks like. I'll start at the beginning and just kind of thumb through it real quick, and then we'll keep answering questions. Hold on, got to get way back to the beginning. So here's some of those, supplemental information with the height ratios. Lots of words, but there's a lot of charts in there and a lot of drawings that are pretty descriptive. This is the matrix that I was talking about that tells you whether or not you need to go to the Architecture Review Board or whether you can have an administrative review for different types of projects. So it's pretty self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, happy to answer them in our office. And there's a whole section in the beginning on definitions that explain, what we mean by certain words. And so you can see it's pretty obvious in there. Okay, sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about awnings, John?
Yes, thank you. Awnings. And the way awnings are currently identified, they are considered a structure. So if your awning crosses a setback or if it encroaches across a property line, it's going to require an Architectural Review Board review. That's another one of those things we're talking about, potentially editing, but we're not sure yet. But currently it's considered a structure, and it needs to be looked at like a structure. And it's also very important to recognize what happens with the water that runs off of that awning, because it can affect your neighbor's property significantly and their well-being. So we got to make sure that when we put an awning up, it's not going to affect anything like that.
Back.
Hi. Could you go to the slide or slides on the SAR ratio? I'm trying to understand that a
The
little
floor area ratio?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand that a little more. If you go to that slide and just talk about that briefly.
Alrighty. Well, so let me see. This is going to be fun to try to find on here because this is a PDF. Oh, the PowerPoint one? Okay, let me find that one again. And I think I closed it. I'll open a new one. All right, slideshow. Okay. Find where. Did I pass it? No, that wasn't. No. There we go. Okay, so if you have a 40 by 50 lot, 2,000 square feet is your total area of the property, right? So if you have a 2,000 square foot house that's on that property, you have an FAR of 1. So if you added up your first floor and your second floor and any percentages of your attic or basement that are allowed to be, or that are required to be added in the regulations, if you exceed the maximum floor area ratio that's listed in the book, that requires a variance. So you have to go to the Architectural Review Board. You're trying to keep your building as similar to the sizes of buildings around you. So when you increase floor area, we're just trying to regulate how much you can increase that. And we're giving you some bonuses, like I said, for attic and basement, if you're not expanding the wall structures, for example, around that. Trying to give you some advantage to using your basement and your attic space. Is that enough?
Yes.
Am I correct in that the ARB manages certain use of certain architectural materials, for example, vinyl siding?
Yes, in this
Okay.
book it tells you that
Yeah.
vinyl siding currently is not allowed.
Okay, my question is how in the future regulations are you going to deal with the evolving nature of material availability?
Okay. Did everybody hear the question, or does it? So the future of materials, we're currently in the process of new materials that were not specifically identified as acceptable in the architectural and land use regulations. Like there are PVC windows that previously were not allowed. So if you get those Marvin Integrity windows, for example, they have a PVC frame, which is a long-lasting solid frame. They have a wood interior that is attached to it. We've been allowing that. Even though it's a plastic material, We're allowing that because we consult with Bob. Bob's been great. He's poor guy. He gets so many phone calls. But we consult with Bob and other members of the ARB when we are reviewing these types of things, and then we make comments in our little notebook about the next edit to the ALU regulations, and that's how we're doing it. So we'll be evolving the regulations for new materials as they come out.
So that,
It
architects
depends,
and
yeah, it depends on, again, if we talk it over and if it's something that won't affect the character of the building, or a lot of the, like the vinyl and the aluminum siding prohibitions in the regulations, a lot of that was sustainability. It was environmental because of the manufacturing process and then what happens to the product when it gets thrown away, that type of thing. But it's also aesthetic. Plastic, for example, for handrails on porches, they just look cheap. They don't look substantial. The shiny plastic especially. You can get into some of the composite materials, the Boral, the AZACs, those are allowed. And those aren't specifically identified. Some of them are. It says composite materials, I think in the new regs it says that. But it's going to be an evolution. As long as new products are coming out, we have to evolve with it. And we have to just check in with the Architecture Review Board occasionally if there is enough demand for a particular type of product to ask that. And that Marvin Integrity Window is a good example because they came out strong with their marketing and everybody was buying them and asking us, is that approved? And so we did review it and got approved.
Jade?
Could you speak to sprinklers, sprinkler regulations, or what you have to say about sprinklers?
You're talking about sprinkler systems in the house?
Systems for fire.
Fire? We don't get into that.
Ratio.
That is all with the town of Chautauqua. The code enforcement officer for the town of Chautauqua regulates that piece of it.
So you mentioned that some painting is not allowed. What is
No,
it?
it's allowed. It's sometimes you don't have to have an application to do painting, and minor touch up and repair work.
What if you're changing the color of your exterior?
We're not regulating the color so much. We're just pretty much regulating the time frame that you can do it. And you can actually paint at your house in the summer season if there's no noise. Like if you can't have a contractor up there blasting rap music, next to the amp. Not that there's anything wrong with rap. I kind of like it, but just any music can't be blasted. So we, and also we worry about where they're going to put their vehicles and equipment. If you can't park it and be out of the way, we're not going to approve it.
Sir?
So, if I understand correctly, things like interior painting, interior flooring covers, countertops, that's code issue, but that would be, if it's above $20,000, it would be a city issue, not a...
Well, no, we also need to know if you're doing anything in the house, we need to know what you're doing, and we review it to determine if it's affecting anything in the regulations. And you do still need an application for a certificate, a compliance certificate, if you're doing flooring, if you're doing interior painting sometimes, it depends, the extent, and if you're doing countertops, those all need to be sent in and you need to get a compliance certificate. But again, if it's above 20,000, the code enforcement officer then is going to ask you all the questions and then he'll issue a separate building permit. So you'll have two of them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And how often does the board meet, and if you wanted to put in the basement, you had a, say, asphalt driveway, are the regulations when you do X amount of work, you've got to bring something else into compliance?
Yes. So he asked about the frequency of our board meetings and then also about whether or not like an asphalt driveway can be worked on or replaced partially. Is that right?
Well, would you be required to remove the asphalt?
Right, okay. So on the part about the schedule, the Architecture Review Board meets regularly with the Board of Trustees. It's usually the Thursday or so before the Board of Trustees meeting. So the next one is August 22nd, and there's a board meeting, a regular Board of Trustees meeting right after that on a Saturday, Friday, Saturday typically. They meet in February, May, July, August, and November. Did I miss anything? And then as far as replacing parts of your driveway, for example, We'll come out and look at it. If you have an asphalt driveway that's existing or a concrete driveway that's existing and you've got spalling and cracks and all that sort of thing, we'll come out and look at it with you. If you're going to replace a little piece of it, we're going to allow that to happen, like up to 25% of it at the most. And we try not to even go that high, but but we don't require you to pull up existing paving unless you're exceeding a significant amount of it, where you might as well just go ahead and make it all compliant. We try to keep you on the straight and level with that.
But somebody with a big construction project, would they be required to pull out the driveways?
No, not if they're going to reuse it again, and if they're going to protect it. If they tear it all up and you're replacing most of it, then no. We're going to say, let's go back with a semi-pervious system.
Did somebody, it seems like somebody put in that asphalt driveway this year over the ravine. I might be wrong.
If they did, I missed it, and it's possible, but we'll come down on them if we have to.
Could I just add, ARB meetings are open to the public if anyone wants to attend.
What?
They're usually at Turner Community Center, usually at 10 a.m., but they are open to the public.
Yeah, he said that the ARB meetings are open to the public if you're interested in attending. They're at Turner Community Center, and it's typically around 10 o'clock, 10:30, depending on how many cases there are, and we identify that in the notification letter and also online.
And the blue shirt there?
Just a question, assume things like floor area ratio are really relevant to new construction, and those who thought recently go to look back and figure out that does this house has been there since 1994? No, if it's there and it's been there for a while, it's presumably grandfathered?
Yes. Yeah, if you do something new and it adds to that floor area, it will typically not require you to go back and take anything out, typically, but it might. That's why there's a review board. Things are reviewed that are subjective, things that people have to think about and say, well, maybe you should remove that if we're giving you this, So it's a judgment call.
Sorry.
Exactly, you mentioned some difficulty contacting people within 150 feet. In your database, besides listing the local property address, say 28 Miller, do you also have a secondary address where most of us lives?
Yeah, that's the primary address that we get from the clerk's office. They give us your home. If you're a fly-in, we'll get your home address primarily.
What's the difference? Both addresses, what's usually the difficulty?
Occasionally, someone will have moved, sold their house, and the clerk's office hasn't updated in time, or the update that we got crossed with a new update, and it's really complicated. It happens a lot. I know in municipality it happens a lot as well.
The biggest complaint we usually hear is when it's owned by multiple members of a family. One of the family member gets and neglects to tell the others.
Yeah.
That's the biggest complaint.
Right. Yeah.
If we are replacing a worn-out window or a screen door and it looks identical to what is in the building now, is that acceptable, or do we have to have a certificate?
You have to have a certificate, especially windows and doors. We want to make sure that you're doing it like it was. When you say looks like, it should also be the similar material and a type of material that's acceptable, especially windows and doors.
That's right, that answer.
Okay.
Right there.
Sorry, I didn't see. Yep.
Oh, I was just wondering how you handle requests for adjustments for American disabilities for changing something in your house to make it more accessible for.
Okay. She was asking about how we review accessibility issues like Americans with Disabilities Act issues. We do give deference in quite many cases for like exterior ramps, if you need an exterior ramp, for example. Even if it's like an emergency, if something happened where someone had a tragedy and they are no longer mobile, if it happened in the summer, we review it pretty quickly and see if there's a way that we can help you accommodate that person. And it's reviewed as a regular building project from the inside, but again, we'll look at it with some sensitivity and understand what you're up against. And so, yeah, there's leverage there. flexibility there.
He talked about an asphalt driveway. What if we want to put in a pervious driveway? Do you have on your website recommendations?
We don't currently. If you send me an email, I've been sending links to different types of systems that show you. But a lot of the contractors around here, I won't name any because I don't want to get in trouble like that. A lot of contractors around here that do that type of work, they have a nice a system that they've been using, and it's pretty, there's a big deep base of gravel that goes under, so you have to dig down a little bit. And a lot of times you run into some tree problems because the roots are down there and you don't want to cut the tree roots unless you do it right. So you'll have a gravel sub base that has a silt fabric around it that keeps the silt from coming up and clogging all the joints in between each stone. And so that system is designed a certain way to hold water. And then the surface pavers go on a certain way, and they have to have a certain gap between them with a specific type of little gravel that goes in between those joints that allows the water to percolate through it. And some people have mistakenly or on purpose put polymeric sand in those joints. Polymeric sand is a cementitious product that solidifies, doesn't allow the water to go through it, but it also prevents weeds from growing out of it, which people tend to like. That's not allowed. But yeah, I would check with a local contractor or a landscape architect or an architect. They can help you with those designs. We're looking at improving our graphics in the manual to include things like that, but we haven't yet.
Do you have your email address?
My email address? We have a department address. It's called Camp Ops. So it's CAMPS. Wait a minute. CAMPOPS. CAMPOPS @chq.org. You're welcome.
Well, I want to thank John.
Thank you.
For coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Just to close the season of our meetings, these are your meetings, and I'm always interested in your input to how we can make better subject matter. At the moment, I've put a list together of proposed 3 subjects next year. Paul Perry talked about a new communications platform that CPOA is going to put into effect this coming year, and I'm going to be talking about that. How will that affect you all? And I'm also inviting Joe Gerasi, our new security chief, a director of security, to talk about rules and regulations on the grounds. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is the new strategic plan and how it may affect your business or not. So those are the subjects for next year. Any questions for me?
Thank you for all you do for us.
You're welcome.